Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. I'm going to talk about some of the background around keeping people with MS in work and why that's been quite difficult. And I hope I'm going to suggest some positive strategies towards the end, which perhaps will keep your smirch at bay. So, there's a problem, and this is probably a problem you're familiar with, which is at onset, nearly everybody with MS has a job. But within 20 years of onset, only 20% of people remain in work. And when I read the literature, there are lots of reasons for this. And people say, oh, it's the amount of disability. People out of work are more disabled on the whole than those in work. But it doesn't actually really explain why people start to lose work right from the start of diagnosis. So right at the beginning, in the first few years after diagnosis, people start to lose their jobs. And in fact, when you look at the studies, the amount of disability doesn't explain why people aren't working. So very few of the studies actually report the amount of disability. But let's look at this. This was a study in Northern Ireland quite a long time ago. And what it said was only 14% of people with MS were working. And they had an EDSS of 6. And the definition of an EDSS of 6 is up and about, able to work a full day. So the amount of physical disability does not explain why people aren't in work. Quite a lot of the people who come out of work say, oh, well, my memory wasn't as good as it was, or my attention or concentration. But again, when you actually really examine the data, that doesn't explain why people come out of work. And those slides I showed you are quite old, but this is a more recent study. This is a few years ago, and it's a British study. And again, you can see that despite the passage of time, people with MS start to come out of work very early on and continue coming out of work until at 30 years, hardly anybody is employed. Now, that might be because they've all retired by that stage. And there's a general recognition that this is not a good thing. Even members of Parliament identify that it's not a good thing. Preventing a person losing a job because of their disability merits further attention, as it seems more efficient than providing assistance and support after this has happened. So there's been, since 2006, increasing focus on supporting people with disability to remain in work. But has that translated to something useful? Well, it's interesting. 6 million disabled people of working age in Britain. That's 1 in 5 of the population, and that covers a whole range of diagnoses. Only 51% of disabled people in work. And of the total number of people of working age out of work in Britain, 40% have a disability. It doesn't make for good reading, does it? And what's really interesting is these figures show the rise in the number of unemployment claimants. It shows the number of people on out-of-work benefit of some sort from 2000 all the way through to 2010. And you remember that there was a point in which the economy was booming and employment rates were very high. And there was even a room in the Labour Party were going to talk about full employment as a goal at one point. And as the unemployment figures fell, and here we hit the recession in 2009, but as the unemployment figures fell, what happened to the people with disability? Those figures stayed constant. So people with disabilities didn't benefit from the fall in unemployment rates. That's all rather depressing, isn't it? So why is that? And it's probably partly because people can't access the help they want. So we were fortunate to receive some money from the Department of Health to map vocational rehabilitation services for people with long-term neurological conditions throughout England. And we wanted to see just how good the vocational rehabilitation provision was. And vocational rehabilitation is simply a service that supports people to stay in work or to job seek afterwards. To explore the extent to which vocational rehabilitation services fitted with current guidelines and recommendations for best practice, and to explore perceptions regarding the facilitators and barriers. And this is what we found. We found a total of about 125 services throughout the UK. Most of these, you'll be glad to know, cluster around London and the southeast. There's then a fair number running up that M1, M6 corridor. You don't want to live in East Anglia, and you certainly don't want to live in the West Country. This service down here, one of them right at the bottom, has since closed since we did this study. Actually, it's lovely in the West Country, but I don't want to upset anybody from Devon and Cornwall. And when we looked at these services, what we found was the biggest group, sorry, let's go back, is that the first group we saw were patients, that doesn't project very well, I'm sorry, that were patients who had vocational rehabilitation as a component of a generic rehabilitation service. Okay. The largest group by far were those services that were neurological rehabilitation services and offered some vocational rehabilitation. And then a small number of services were simply committed to vocational rehabilitation. Now, within this large group that said they were offering vocational rehabilitation, 8 services simply assessed vocational needs, which was to say they got as far as saying, gosh, yes, you've got difficulties at work. They provided a bit of education, and then they referred you back to Job Centre Plus for a bit of help. And I'm sure many people would give me anecdotes. I can see someone there who'd like to give me an anecdote about Job Centre Plus, because not everybody has had a terribly positive experience. We then had 17 services where there was actually a multidisciplinary team. And so typically this small group were only an OT. Here there might be an occupational therapist and a psychologist interested. And they'd provide a few vocational interventions. This group, which were the largest group, would actually write to your employer on your behalf. But they probably wouldn't go to the workplace. And this lot would get training on the subject of vocational rehabilitation 4 times a year, and they would offer some assistance with job seeking. Now, half of these covered all neurological conditions, and half were condition-specific. And the condition-specific ones tend to be patients with brain injury, not people with MS. And these services at the top that are highlighted in red we felt were the most specialist services that offered the most comprehensive service. And we're not looking at a very large group of services there. So, what were the conclusions? Well, most services are small. They treat 10 to 20 patients a year. And this isn't just people with MS, this is all neurological conditions. At a conservative estimate, and this fits into statistics which are difficult to really prove through, I would think the vocational rehabilitation services meet less than 10% of the need of people with long-term neurological conditions. We can say the teams are under-resourced in terms of the numbers of staff numbers, the range of disciplines, and the amount of expertise. We don't know how to collect outcome data, so we can't demonstrate to commissioners that what we do works. And most vocational rehab in England is provided by what goes on within existing rehab teams. So as part of this survey, we also tried to find out why there were so many barriers to setting up good vocational rehabilitations. And this was based on some qualitative work and also responses to the survey. And the barriers are typically about lack of money, competing priorities, not enough staff, no existing rehabilitation services, and those all count as barriers. And the most important one, I think, is this one. Vocational rehabilitation is not related to health. And a lot of commissioners won't commission vocational rehabilitation services from health services because they say it is not a health issue, it's a Department of Work and Pensions issue. Now that is wrong, and I'll show you why in a minute. There are some drivers to service development, but mainly this was that one particular person had a vision that vocational rehabilitation was something we should be doing in healthcare. There was also an evidence base driving us towards doing more vocational rehabilitation and a range of strategic decisions. Now, I talked about the evidence base just there, and the question is how strong is the evidence base for providing vocational rehabilitation in MS? Now, if you start to think about vocational rehabilitation, it's what we call a complex intervention. And a complex intervention is one in which you've got multiple components. You don't quite know which one that works. And the moment you try and deconstruct it, the whole thing falls apart. And this document, it was published by the Medical Research Council, and it's a framework for evaluating complex interventions designed to improve health. And they identify this 5-stage approach to evaluating complex interventions. There is a preclinical stage where you think about the theory, you look at the literature, you then try and model the service, you do an exploratory trial, you then do a definitive randomized controlled trial, and then you roll it out. And we've been very fortunate to have funding from the MS Society to allow us to go through these steps in the context of work with MS. And I will tell you that in our exploratory study, we absolutely demonstrated that an intervention to support people with MS to remain in work costs less than £900, which is less than a course of intravenous methylprednisolone and has a better impact on quality of life than a course of intravenous methylprednisolone. So I leave you to think about that and take that back to your services. Now, one of the first things we did was we did some focus groups to ask people with MS what they actually wanted from a vocational rehabilitation service. And 2 big themes came up. One was about managing social and personal expectations. There was something around support with disclosure and something about support with issues around discrimination. And also, I think, in terms of that managing personal expectations, that's about controlling your smirch. I've always done it like this. I've always worked 12 hours a day. It's what I expect of myself. Well, you don't need to do that. You can work only 8, or 6, or 4. And then there's something about managing performance. And I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. But what's important is that there is a move towards recognizing the importance of vocational rehabilitation and work as a health-related issue. And this is the NHS Outcomes Framework, and Domain 2 is enhancing quality of life for people with long-term conditions. And in there, it specifically states that people should be supported to remain in the workplace. And that is part of the NHS Outcomes Framework. So if any health commissioner or any clinician tells you that health is not part of work, that is not true. There is also now a Rehabilitation Delivery Board, which has been set up under the chairmanship of John Etherington, who has run the very good rehabilitation service at Headley Court for disabled soldiers. And this Rehabilitation Delivery Board is going to focus on good outcomes, and it's going to aim high and include vocation. So there is a little ray of light that maybe things in terms of NHS services will start to improve. The other thing that I think is encouraging is that as of the end of 2014, the Department of Work and Pensioners are going to launch their Health and Work service. It will be delivered by a private provider, but essentially if people come out of work and their GPs think they're going to be out of work for 4 weeks or more, they can refer people to this Health and Work service. Now, it's actually a telephone service, but they will get people will get an online telephone conversation, providing them with some general signposting and a return-to-work plan. There's a number of other things. There'll be a website and a help plan. They're going to try and evaluate this. And interestingly in here, there will be tax exemptions on up to £500 per person per year for any private healthcare interventions. So if you want some maintenance physiotherapy to keep your mobility going so you can go to work, you can ask your employer to pay for that and they will get tax exemptions on it. Okay, so let's think about the first thing that the focus groups talked about. They talked about support with disclosure and support with issues around discrimination. So the Equality Act 2010 states very clearly that you automatically meet the disability definition from the day you are diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. You are protected by the Equality Act. And what that means is it's against the law for an employer or a potential employer to treat you less favourably or discriminate against you because of your MS. And if you ask your employment to make reasonable adjustments so you can keep doing your job, then they are required to do so. Now, of course, your employer can't make reasonable adjustments and he can't protect you under the Equality Act unless you've actually told him you've got MS. And disclosing whether or not you have MS is a really big decision step for people to take. But I would encourage you to disclose your MS in the workplace. And the reason for this is because, as shown in this paper from Australia, it positively affects your employment status and your ability to hold down your job. And what they did here was they did a survey of nearly 1,500 people, and they surveyed them on each of 3 consecutive years. And so this would have been a spread of people with a range of different diagnoses. And what they showed was that, on average, the odds of a person with MS remaining in employment increased by 1.3 when a disclosure to an employer had been made. And the other thing was that those who disclosed had nearly a 3.5-year increase in how long they stayed in a job. So disclosure on the whole, despite people's anxieties, is a positive thing to do. So I guess when you're thinking about disclosure, there are 3 things to think about. One is, should I tell? The second one is, who should I tell? And the third one is, how much should I tell? So should I tell? This clearly is a personal decision, but there are advantages about telling people. There is the burden of going to work knowing that you have MS and not sharing it, and not other people knowing it, and feeling that all the time there's a bit of you that you're keeping hidden away from people. If you tell, you are more likely to get support from your employer and from your colleagues. If you tell at a point at which you choose, it is more likely to be a positive disclosure. Whereas if you tell at the point at which it is forced upon you because you've had a relapse or your disability has become much more obvious, it is perhaps more difficult to be positive about that. And if you disclose, you can have reasonable adjustments made. Disadvantage, the big one, the one everybody's frightened of, is that people will then have a go at you and use it as an excuse to be difficult. Now, there is one situation in which you have to tell, and that is when you are, if you don't tell, you are failing in your obligation as an employee under the terms of the Health and Safety at Work Act. So you have an obligation as an employee to take reasonable care for your own health and safety and that of other people. And you also have to do what your boss says in terms of keeping safe. Right? So I have a responsibility under the Health and Safety at Work Act to wash my hands when I see patients at work. It's what my employer expects. It's how I stop spreading hospital-acquired infections. Okay? But if you work at a height with other people and your balance is poor and you don't tell someone and you fall off a ladder, I'm afraid that you have to take some of the responsibility for that. Even worse, if you fall off a ladder and hurt somebody else, you would also have to take responsibility for that because you have failed under the terms of the Health and Safety at Work Act. So the situation which you have to disclose is when your disability is impacting on your ability to work. Who should you tell? Well, there are advantages and disadvantages to telling each of these. You can tell your manager, you can tell your colleagues, you can tell human resources. If you tell human resources, you then immediately become protected under the Equality Act. Your employer knows that you have MS and they have to behave accordingly. If you tell your manager, you can start to have a more direct conversation about the sorts of accommodations and adjustments that you want making. If you tell your colleagues, it will be around the office like wildfire. And you have to choose which of those you want. I do not think if you tell one colleague, it will stay secret very long, not if you work in an office like mine. How much should you tell? Well, this again is for an individual, but what I would encourage you to do is to disclose at work as positively as you can. So, not my MS is getting worse, my hands are clumsy, my typing's crap, and it means I can't do my job properly. Yeah? But I have a medical condition which affects the dexterity of my hands. If I could have voice-activated software, I would be much more productive. And there's a whole difference in tone in the way those disclosures are operated. Okay, now the other thing that people said that they wanted from a vocational rehabilitation service was help managing performance. And we conceptualized this at the time in 3 different ways. One is how you improve performance, One is about how you compensate for difficulties in performance, and the third one is about how you modify performance if necessary. And these essentially are the things you can ask for in terms of reasonable adjustments. So what's meant by a reasonable adjustment? A reasonable adjustment is one that your employer can afford to do. So if you work for the NHS, despite the fact it's broke, it is a very, very large organisation, and it can afford to put very big accommodations in. You can work 1 day a week. If you work for a small firm with 5 people, and you want to work 1 day a week, that may not work for that firm. So it is all about what works for the firm, and so there is no hard and fast definition of what is reasonable. Okay? So what might people want? Well, they might want to try and improve their performance. Your balance, your mobility might be poor, and some physiotherapy might help. And we've already heard talk about fatigue management, trying to manage the fatigue at work. And there are ways of doing that. You might want to think about compensations. So you might want to think about flexible or altered working hours, working from home 1 or 2 days a week, regular breaks, moving your desk, car parking space. Flexible or altered working hours, I think, are interesting. A lot of people want to work 3 days a week. Sometimes people want to work short days. Actually, in London, one of the things that works quite well is working long days, but with a rest day in between. Because if you work a long day, you cut down the amount of travelling, and it's often the travelling that's exhausting. So 3 long days with a break in between may work better than a lot of short days. Regular breaks, getting somewhere where you can have a rest is quite tricky, but actually being rigorous in taking a lunch hour instead of eating your lunch at your desk is a really useful thing to do. And outside London, one of the things people do if they drive their cars to work, and I've had a couple of people I've known who've gone and sat in their car at lunch, turned back the seat, and had 20 minutes, 30 minutes sleep at lunchtime. So there are ways of taking regular breaks. Moving your desk so it's near to the loo, or having your desk converted into a cubicle so that you're not so distracted. These things work. Having somewhere to park your car next to the chief executive so that you're close to the front door. Those sorts of things can all make a difference. All the things we all ought to do at work. I sit at my office, at my desk, and my emails are flashing in, and the phone's going off, and I'm trying to talk to someone. I find it incredibly demanding, and I don't have any difficulties with attention, in theory. Good idea to switch your email off. Actually close it down so you don't see them popping into your inbox. Choose a time when you're going to answer your phone, and the rest of the time switch it to voicemail and switch it off. So you're only doing one task at once. All quite useful strategies. Okay. What other adjustments? You can change your workstation, a larger computer screen, improved lighting, adapted keyboard or mouse, voice recognition software, changing your seating so it's more supportive. Somewhere to rest, time off for medical appointments, improving physical accessibility, so you can provide handrails or a ramp. Those sorts of things can be done. And part-time working. So here we're talking about modifying performance when it's no longer become sustainable through the use of reasonable accommodation to continue working. You might want to go part-time. You might want to think about alterations in the job description so your work is slightly different. Or you might want to be redeployed within the organisation so that you're working in a different sort of way. So a lot of people, for instance, who've been working outdoors or doing a lot of manual labour get moved to an office later on. Now, access to work is worth knowing about, and it allows you to fund some of these changes in equipment and things like voice-activated software. So an access to work grant can pay for practical support, and it can do anything to help you start working, stay in work, or move into self-employment. The only exception to this is if you work for a government department when it's meant to come from within the government department itself. But the most useful thing it can do is pay for taxis to and from work. And we have a number of people now with MS who we've supported to get access from taxis to and from work. If you need an electrically propelled wheelchair at work because you have to walk longer distances at work than you do at home, then it can pay for an electrically propelled chair. If you have one at home, it will pay for a second one in the workplace. it will pay for a whole range of things that can make life easier. We worked once with a teacher, and Access to Work paid for her not only to have a perching stool, but for her to have a whiteboard that actually went up and down on the wall, so that she didn't have to stand up to write on the whiteboard because her balance wasn't very good, but the whiteboard could come down. She could write on it from the perching stool, and then it would be, and then she'd press a button, it would lift up so the class could see it. This I thought was just interesting. The current system of state benefits should not prevent people returning to or remaining in work on a part-time basis while undertaking treatment or rehabilitation. And so what has always been a problem in the past is that if you work intermittently, your benefits end up being started and stopped and started and stopped. But if you're working a limited number of hours, benefits shouldn't change. So, 3 particular crunch points, I think, for people. At diagnosis, what should you do? Well, I think consider disclosure when ready. You are the person who will teach your employer about MS. And you can teach them this is a disorder which is manageable, that people don't necessarily accrue severe disability, and they can have continue to work for a very long time. I think people need to be aware of the Equality Act and the Access to Work and educate their employer and line manager. Line managers do not know what their responsibilities are, and frankly, they're anxious. They are anxious that if they do something wrong, you will sue them. They are anxious that if they do something wrong, they will make your MS worse. So if you tell them about your MS and reassure them about those things, and then tell them what you want them to do, they'll be mightily relieved. Be aware of the need for fatigue management. One of the things we found with our work where we asked people with MS what they wanted to support them remain in work was actually very few people were aware of the availability of fatigue management, which surprised us. But clearly early on people aren't. Sometimes a cognitive assessment is helpful. People, if you've had a relapse or you start to get worried about your memory, actually having a cognitive assessment, which in our experience demonstrates that people are pretty cognitively intact, is actually quite reassuring. And plan in advance. Have a little think about what you might want should you have a relapse. And there was, and I think they've still got it, the MS Society, they might be about to republish it, a workbook on MS and work, which includes having planning conversation with your employer and a contract about if I go off with a relapse, this is what I want to happen. I want you to leave me alone for 2 weeks and then I will phone you. So you have a contract with your employer about what will happen should you have a relapse. After a relapse, I think the important thing is recognizing invisible disabilities. I'm talking about an anxiety, fatigue, cognitive slips, anxiety cycle. And this goes like this. I've just had a relapse. I've got to get back to work, otherwise I'm going to lose my job. You go back to work a bit early, and by lunchtime, and not unreasonably, you've had a relapse, you're quite anxious about that. You're anxious about returning back to work. By lunchtime, you are exhausted. Now, anxiety can cause difficulties with attention and concentration and memory. Exhaustion can cause difficulties with attention, concentration, and memory. By the middle of the afternoon, you start to make mistakes. And then you think, gosh, my memory's wrecked, I've got cognitive problems, my thinking skills are affected. And guess what? That makes you anxious, and that makes you more tired, and that feeds into the belief that you've got cognitive problems. That situation, having a more graded return to work much more slowly, and human resources departments think a graded return to work is 3 days this week, 4 days next week, and 5 days the week after. And it needs to be a much slower graded return to work than that. Because what we want to do at all costs is avoid the fatigue. And then if you still remain anxious about cognitive slips, memory, and attention, ask for a cognitive assessment. Because as I say, our experience in this situation is actually people's thinking skills are pretty much intact and shouldn't be impacting on their ability to work. Okay, third situation, the toxic employer. 1 or 2 people have toxic employers. Nobody, with MS or not, should work for a toxic employer. If you have a toxic employer, don't let your smirch tell you, I need to stay here because I'll never get another job. Get another job and get out, because that's what everybody should do if they've got a toxic employer. And then the final one is thinking about retiring on ill health grounds. And before you think, I can't do this anymore, I'm going to retire, really think about what the problems are at work. Really think about how performance can be managed and see whether or not it's possible to remain in it. Believe it or not, work is good for you. There is enormous evidence that work is good for you. And that probably needs qualifying a bit. Probably good work is good for you. All right? But we all know that work is part of identity. It provides a structure to the day. It provides companionship. And really importantly, it provides a salary. So if you're thinking about retiring on ill health grounds, I think it really is worth thinking about whether that's what you really want to do. Clearly, for some people, it is the right thing to do. And then thinking about not only retirement, but how is one going to occupy the day? What are the substitutes for work that are going to happen? How are you going to remain engaged and keep that structure to the day, the sense of identity, the companionship is an important part of thinking about retirement. Now, I just thought I'd show this slide at the end. We've done some work as well as with the MS side with Macmillan, and they produced this strategic framework for cancer work support. And it emphasizes a number of things that are quite important. One is if you want to stay and work, there are a number of things that one needs. And we need engagement of employments, engagement of MS services, engagement of things like the Disability Law Service, access to work, and we also need specialist vocational rehabilitation services. And what Macmillan did when they did this work, and we were involved in, was identify three levels of support for people with MS, for people with cancer. So there's that slide, perhaps in a slightly less busy way. So we have people with MS at the centre, MS services at hospitals, engagement with employers, specialist vocational rehabilitation services, and organisations providing work support. And they all need to work together to keep people with MS in work. And within that three-level model of MS work support, we have level 1, which is the majority of people. And what they need is a little bit of signposting. Level 2 are people with relatively straightforward problems from the point of view of vocational rehabilitation services, and this might be after a relapse. And level 3, people with perhaps increasing disability who are trying to remain in work situations, and that's more complex. So at level 1, what we've got is everybody who work or has the potential to work. And I think the important thing here is putting work on the agenda. I strongly encourage my neurological colleagues to ask about work, and an awful lot of them don't. And so we need to be aware of that. And then if people say, actually, I'm beginning to have a bit of difficulty, signposting them to the next level for help. And the next level of support could be provided by an MS nurse, can be provided by your occupational therapist, but that's about tailored information, advice, and support. So it is about planning, for instance, a return to work, a graded return to work after MS relapse. And the third one are people with complex problems who need more specialist rehabilitation, with professionals who are expert in supporting people to remain in work. And with that in mind, I will just highlight our vocational rehab service at Queen Square. It's been open for 18 months now. We saw 300 patients in the first year, and we're going to see rather more than that this year. The team are drowning, but that's the team. And the really important people in that photo are Catherine Dugan, she's our psychologist, Joe Herford, who's a very senior occupational therapist, and Kate Hayward here, who's, again, a senior occupational therapist, a highly specialist occupational therapist. And those are the key members of the team, and if you want some advice, please encourage your GP to refer you. And I apologise if the waiting list is long, but we are hoping to grow the service yet further, and a long waiting list will help. So thank you very much.